Democrats debate and Donald Trump wins on this episode of The Uprising.
LibertyNation.com. They are the resistance, but we are the uprising. With Scott Cosenza.
I felt this thrill going up my leg.
There's not going to be a President Donald Trump.
A president! Can you believe it?
This is somebody who knows what's right and what's wrong.
You know what podcasts are, by the way?
Talk shows for people who cannot make it in talk radio.
I just want to say to the men in this country, just shut up, do the right thing for a change.
I think possibly that's the most unattractive form in which prejudice can be met in this country, is the rage of the entitled.
Okay, fresh off of his, well, you're not fresh off your vacation. I'm fresh off of my vacation in uprising time, Tim, but you're fresh off of your attempt to keep the metric system from being used effectively in the United States. Did you tell people? No, you didn't. I listened. By the way, thank you for doing a good job solo last week. I appreciated the podcast as I was driving
home. But
you
wanted to make sure I didn't do too well.
Well,
I mean,
Tim,
it's nice to have a guest host, but you don't want him to do too well.
I without flattering myself, I think my job security is secure, Tim, as
All it means is that you have concluded in your mind that I'm no threat to you at all.
Your attempts at likability, Tim, will not buffer the fact that you spent time out at the Bohemian Grove special secret enclave for our nation's elite.
I'm not at liberty to either confirm or deny that, Counselor.
Can you say, I think this is really, because most people don't know anybody who's been there, and of course it's shrouded in this Alex Jones-like, what do you call it, conspiracy theory business.
I've read every
You've been going out there for a long time now because of a close relation who is a formal member of the organization that puts on the event.
True.
And you admit it.
Yeah. So you admit it.
So what goes on? What really goes on at the Bohemian Grove? Give us actually, if you could walk us through a typical day in Grove. It's at a campsite, right? A rural.
It's at a beautiful grove in the Redwood Grove in Sonoma County, California, in a protected area that's near the Russian River. It's about 200 acres.
Aha!
The Russian River. Well, look, make of that what you will. I'm not at liberty to say whether there's any significance or not to the Russian River thing.
Was Moscow Mitch there?
Moscow Mitch did not make an appearance this year, though he has been there in the past. It's an encampment in a 200-acre grove with the most beautiful, like up to 2,000-year-old redwoods. There's like 100 individual camps. Each camp has its own sort of membership roles and their own traditions and all that sort of stuff. And then you have the best speakers, the best food, the best music, the best of everything, because the people that are there are the highest rollers of all. They're titans of industry. They're prominent politicians. I think 5 presidents have either been members or visited. I'm not sure. But it's what it is, Scott, is the ultimate camping experience. Okay. It's the most luxurious camping experience you've ever had. And of course, the fact that there's a lot of wealthy, successful tycoons that go there leads to the obvious speculation that something nefarious must be going on.
Now, what kind of marshmallows do these folks like to toast around the campfire?
I have no recollection of that, Senator.
Well,
I'm not at liberty to say, Scott.
Camping with a sommelier is something I aspire to, Tim. So,
well, the sommelier goes a step behind the valet.
Naturally. Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that you didn't have to spend too much time disciplining your menials out there, and the services were to your standards.
My staff was acceptable.
All right. Did you enjoy watching? You're probably one of the few people I know that I'm friends with who watched both debates cover to cover. Okay?
Yes, I did.
I think one of the interesting things about it was, for the party of the people, Tim, the average man, woman, and child, and non-binary, how could you
the
find,
party of the people? You must mean the Republican Party of Trump, then,
how could you find the debate? It was on CNN only.
It was on CNN only. Well, it was live streamed over YouTube.
You know what?
It was,
So I went to look at it the next day to watch it carefully for review for the podcast, and it was quite difficult to find. CNN did not have it on its website.
You know what?
It wasn't on YouTube.
No, you're
it
right.
wasn't. I went to the DNC's website to see if they had it there.
Okay.
Mediaite, all these websites, Tim. Where can I go watch the full hour and was it or 2 hours and 25 minutes?
It was
couldn't do it.
It was ridiculous. And I had the exact same experience. And I thought it was just some of my search engine, but I did what they call a long tail search where you put in every combination of words you can think of. I couldn't find it either. Some homemade thing that is what I had to wind up using. And it was clipped in the middle of it. So all the notes that I took on the time code readings were way off. But yeah, I don't know why CNN didn't trump it. Well, first of all, they didn't get very good ratings. The ratings were down from the first debate on NBC and MSNBC. And the next one is until September, and the standards are going to be higher. So we'll see if the interest carries into the fall.
I think that I know why they didn't do such a great job in sending it out there, and it's because of the content. They didn't have a great show to put on.
Yeah, that.
I think that we could do it either thematically or night by night. Do you have a preference how you want to attack the content?
Well, my primary allegiance is to the campaign of one Joe Biden, the former the immediate past vice president of the United States, Scott. So I thought we might start with him because, look, he was going to be the obvious target of everyone because after the first debate, everyone said Biden got his ass kicked by Kamala Harris, however you want to say it. And
I like to say it like Kamala the Ugandan giant, who's the former professional wrestler, too.
But you thought she was going to rise in the polls for sure because she took him on and made him look bad, and you were sure he was going to drop.
She is akin to Rosa Parks in our nation's struggle for civil rights.
But in fact, by the time we're a month later and the second debates come down, they're in basically the same place. Kamala Harris picked up maybe a point or two, and Biden basically maintained his 15-point lead. So he was going to be
let me put a cork in your exuberant, enthusiastic reporting on the Biden campaign to suggest that we're going to go through night one first.
That's great.
We're going to spend a few minutes on night one. And I thought that the first thing I heard out of one of the candidates on night one that made me want to stop and talk is this from the socialist from Vermont.
They spend half of what we spend. And by the way, when you end up in a hospital in Canada, you come out with no bill at all. Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. I believe that. I will fight for that.
Now, here's the thing about healthcare.
I just can't stand when they just, because words matter. And if you say healthcare should be a right, then okay, get out there, make that argument, and make it stick. But when you just declare it a right, this is a pet peeve of mine. It is not a right. It's not written anywhere that people have that right.
What is included in the right? So I wanted to play this because I think it's a great time to stop and address first principles.
An Obamacare bronze policy.
and address first principles for people who don't have a firm grounding in it. Why do we say that health care is not a right? And Bernie says it is. Well, if health care is a right, the only rights that I think that you believe in and that I believe in are negative rights. They only require other people to not violate them. The other people don't have to do anything else to actually see that our rights are honored. It'd be helpful if they sort of took action in a cultural way to solve that our rights were supported and so forth. But they don't need to do anything for us to have free speech. All they need to do is not infringe upon that right to free speech.
Exactly.
But for health care, you got to go up and you've got to administer to be health care or pay for somebody who is going to administer it to me. And here's the thing, Tim. What constitutes healthcare in Bernie's world? I'm actually right now shopping for what my insurance company considers an elective health procedure, but it's something that I want to have done. It's a diagnostic procedure. Is that covered under Bernie's plan? In other words, for the wisdom tooth that I had taken out 5 years ago, the sleep component of that procedure, so you didn't have to wake up with the guy's, foot on your shoulder for leverage trying to get that tooth out of your, does it cover that? Is that part of the right of healthcare? What is covered in this right? If there's a new
Elizabeth Warren's got a plan. She's got a plan, and I'm sure that she has covered every jot and tittle of what you said.
I really wish you hadn't said that because I was going to save this clip, Tim.
You asked what was in the right. I'm sure if you went to ElizabethWarren.com or maybe it's Pocahontas.com, she would have a full plan outlined to answer all of your queries.
You know, Tim,
Scott.
her friend, Paul, who she spends time with, has to spend all these answers, by the way. This is like everybody has to have a friend involved in some policy proposal that they then relate to. This naked, like, no matter what you do, don't just announce your policy on taxes. It has to be your neighbor Sally was talking to you in the checkout line at the grocery store about how
my uncle's gardener's wife is grieving right now, and
an immigrant.
And let me tell you her story. You know what the thing is? It's so cheap because you're always able to find some kind of story to back up any proposition that you have. Anybody can do it. A 5-year-old can do that.
In fact, many of the people who they were talking about are probably 5. Well, Warren, by the way, in a moment of just this is why everybody, I think, hates a politician. So she wants to eliminate private health care insurance and have all people get their health care insurance through the government. But she doesn't want to say that. By the way, she says that employers won't be able to dictate your health care coverage, which I think is hilarious.
In other words, we're going to confiscate it.
Right. We're going to forbid
and
them.
Therefore, because we confiscate it, they won't be able to dictate
it's so
Very
hilarious.
simple.
It's like for the people who say, well, I kind of like if they like their employer-supplied health care. Well, no, you're being dictated to. We're going to free you from that dictatorship. But what she won't do is she won't lay claim to what her plan does is raise taxes on the middle class to pay for this giant spending on health care. And she refuses to say so.
Thank you, Senator. Just a point of clarification in 15 extra seconds. Would you raise taxes on the middle class to pay for Medicare for all, offset obviously by the elimination of insurance premiums? Yes or no?
Costs will go up for billionaires and go up for corporations. For middle-class families, total costs will go down.
Governor Bullock.
That's it. The Koch brothers are going to pay for your health care.
Yeah, that's it. Like the bottom line of this, every plan that they've got, and somebody added up the cost of every plan that was proposed in these debates, and it's like $200 trillion.
You know what? That just sounds like a white supremacist.
Yeah.
Counting these dollars about how much there's human beings
what does
out
it
there.
Matter?
There are babies in cages
lives
out
on
there.
the line, Scott.
You go to your fancy parties, and meanwhile, people are dying in the fields out there, Tim. Well,
what did I say? I see what happens when you interrupt me. I keep telling you this, and then
all right. Well, we'll move along. And maybe pick it back up when we
clever
remember.
Strategy to get me off my game. Well done, well played.
Speaking of which, one of the great points I thought of the night for real. This was Congressman Delaney, and this is what he said when he's one of these guys who is sort of swimming against the current here, saying, "Hey, let's not. First of all, it's a bad idea to have this giant government system when people are happy with their health care." For the people who are happy with their health care, leave them be, right? Why do you want to get involved in stirring them up? And also, it seems like this is about more than just health care, Tim, and I think he's on to something.
Thank you, Senator. Hospitals will be better Congressman Delaney, I want to let you have a chance to respond.
Listen, his math is wrong. That's all I'm saying. That his math is wrong. It's been well documented that if all the bills were paid at Medicare rate, which is specifically, I think it's in Section 1200 of their bill, then many hospitals in this country would close. I've been going around rural America, and I ask rural hospital administrators one question. If all your bills were paid at the Medicare rate last year, what would happen? And they all look at me and say, we would close. But the question is, why do we have to be so extreme? Why can't we just give everyone health care as a right and allow them to have choice? I'm starting to think this is not about health care. This is an anti-private sector strategy.
We're going to move.
Bingo. Anti-private sector, whatever it is that can shut down private industry. That's what climate change is all about, which has now become all-encompassing environmental justice, racial environmental justice,
environmental racism.
It's gender-based. Climate change deniers are
the patriarchy
gender-based
infects just about everything, Tim.
Okay, I've got more information or more packed into a short soundbite than any other here, because you want to talk
Is it
about
from night one, Tim? We're still on night one here.
Well, let me see. I got him.
You got him confused?
I got delirious
tell me who it is.
Hickenlooper. He was night 2 or night 1?
I think he's night 2.
He's night 2. Oh, well, I'm just chomping at the bit to play this. Okay,
right,
night 1.
I'll allow it, Tim. Go ahead.
I like that.
With a night 2 clip. Go ahead. I'll give you the privilege of the immediate past.
The panel
co-host.
of judges won. All right.
Go right ahead.
And this is Hickenlooper talking about the insanity, the political insanity of Medicare for All stripping 180 million Americans of private health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
This notion that you're going to take private insurance away from 180 million Americans, who many of them don't want to give it. Many of them do want to get rid of it, but some don't. That is a disaster at the ballot box. You might as well FedEx the election to Donald Trump.
So there you go. Just FedEx it over. Now, the folks in Brown may not be so happy. And somebody's going to look into whether, Hickenlooper took big contributions from Federal Express because he used it on. But he's right. I mean, look, can you argue with that? Can you argue with that? You're going to go, this is the most personal issue, right? The most personal issue for the economy may decide the election, but it's a macro thing, right? It's numbers, it's GDP, it's unemployment rates and stuff. Healthcare,
you can't go to your doctor.
It's so deeply personal that if you reach in and say, we're going to take your policy, and by the way, we got something better. We'll tell you about it later.
I don't understand why you don't trust Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren.
You're going to lose the election if you do that.
These people are smarter than you, Tim. They went to Harvard and Hastings College of Law.
Let me make a point that I wrote about this week. Yeah, Hastings.
They're women of color. I don't understand why you're in opposition.
But here's the point I'm making. Just a quick whirl through the last 10 years, okay? 2010, Obamacare gets passed. 2010 midterms, Democrats get crushed, lose the House. 2012, not much. Obama gets reelected. But in 2014, they lose a lot again, lose control of the Senate. 2016, they lose the presidency. All this time, Obamacare is building up. And people don't like it. They hated it. There were complaints across the board, right? But
there's some website glitches, Tim. Let's not overblow.
Well, when Republicans threatened to take it away, all of a sudden people were, no, I want to buy health care. But Republicans ran on repealing Obamacare in 2016, up and down the line. And when they didn't get it done, they were booted out in 2018 because of John McCain, whose single vote, the rat who said he'd vote for it earlier in the day, and I have that confirmed, and then changed his mind and tanked the bill, handed the health care issue to the Democrats. They used it. It was the number one issue in the 2018 midterms. So what do they do with it? Now they turn around and kick the issue away, give it right back to the Republicans by threatening to take away everybody's private health care.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody who's old enough to be around when the transition happened to Obamacare and had to worry about losing their coverage, it was a disaster, a true disaster. The idea that with a straight face, an Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris can say, trust me to do this for you. Boy, I just can't imagine how.
Well, what's amazing is
they can sell that to anybody, really.
Well, what's amazing to me is that the public would ever trust the Democrats on the issue again because of Obamacare.
Trust a politician. You'd be stupid to give their trust to a Republican, too.
And they didn't because the Republicans, it was another read my lips, no new taxes. It was, we're going to repeal Obamacare. And then they had control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, and they couldn't get it done. In a way, Scott, with that major a promise not fulfilled, in a way they deserve to lose.
The thing that I want to get back to, Tim, about that Delaney quote about it not opposing, about it being opposing the private sector. There's this discussion we've had before in the past about marginal tax rates, and somebody bringing to Obama's attention that if you lowered the marginal tax rate, that the actual total amount of receipts that the government would get would increase. So you could lower taxes, have people have less of a tax burden, and yet at the end of the year, you'd get more money to spend.
Basically, supply side economics.
What did he say about it?
It didn't matter because they needed to make the point that the rate should go higher.
That's right. It's not about the money.
Right.
It's about punishing them for being successful.
Exactly.
And that seems to be what this is about, that Congressman Ryan has picked up on. It's about freedom, Tim. And you know what? Here's what happens. Once the government starts in on they're the only provider of the health care. This is, here's Congressman Ryan, Tim, our new partner in life when the government is in charge of all our health care.
We could start getting good food into our schools and into our communities. That's going to drive health care down. That's another part of the health care conversation that we didn't even have. How do we start talking about health instead of just disease care?
Thank you.
That's another component. We're going to get involved in what you eat, Tim, of course. Did you get your rest?
Michelle Obama already did, I thought.
If you didn't, I mean, they're going to combine probably with these Chinese social credits. And if you didn't have your quantifiable number of vegetables, do you think you're going to be able to get your cookie? You're not going to be able to watch your Netflix shows. It's all going to be tied in together. And when the government is picking up the tab for your health care, guess what?
You've given me the opening for a brilliant segue from in my remarks, prepared remarks, from food, basically food policy in the government to Michelle Obama. Did you see that Michael Moore?
The only thing that can save us, Tim, at this point.
Michael Moore.
The only thing that can save us is Michelle.
Stop. Well, that's what he's saying. That's what Michael Moore is saying. And now,
who can disagree with that kind of analysis?
Before you scoff at him, okay, he's the one that picked up on Trump really early. He made the most passionate speech about why all these blue-collar folks in flyover country were waiting for a guy like Trump and all that. Not that he likes him.
She's
he
our
hates
most
Trump,
fabulous immediate past former first lady.
Immediate past former first lady.
Right.
That's very good.
Yes.
You slipped in every adjective known to man. But
is there any indication that she has any political talent? I mean, in any way? I mean, like actual independent political talent.
I'm getting tripped up on independent.
Well, she makes a good wife for Barack Obama as a politician, I think, right? She speaks well. She seems to be a good mom, to have sort of present a very nice family portrait type person. She seems to say all the right things when she's on the Oprah show.
Yeah, the reason that Michael Moore thinks that she's the one that could win because she is, as he puts it, a beloved national figure. In other words, she's got very high approval ratings. She comes from a guy who was I think Obama was personally popular for the most part.
She overcome her hatred for America when we elevated her husband to the presidency. So that burden has been lifted, So she's set to rule.
I'm so glad I do radio so that I can actually have a little serious conversation before I engage in this kind of.
It's so true, though. I mean, she did say that she didn't like this country. I mean,
no, I know. What she said precisely was it's the first time she was ever proud of her country, which is an unbelievable thing to say. Imagine if Melania Trump said that.
Yeah.
The first time that I was pleased with my country was when they elected Donald.
Yeah.
Imagine if she said that.
They would explode. Yeah.
Twitter would explode, Scott.
Well, Tim, there's one other thing that we need to address. I think it's very important to address as we close out our examination of night
I got one more you got to hear.
All right. Well, before we do that, I want to talk about Mayor Pete and what he thinks of your religiosity, Tim. And it's not that great because I think that you profess to be a Christian. Is that true? A believer in the divinity of Jesus Christ?
Yes.
As Lord and Savior.
A conservative Christian.
And you also oppose, don't you, the fight for 15? And in a personal capacity, I understand this is not a professional judgment, but in a personal capacity, would you say that you oppose the fight for 15?
The 15 minimum wage?
Yes.
100%.
Well, then you're no Christian.
The minimum wage is just too low. And so-called conservative Christian senators right now in the Senate are blocking a bill to raise the minimum wage when Scripture says that whoever oppresses the poor taunts their maker.
Okay, so what he's doing...
What kind of disgusting, non-religious person are you, Tim, to oppose the fight for 15 and then on Sunday proclaim to worship his name.
Scott, we have a constant sub-theme on the Uprising and on the radio show sometimes too. One-step thinking, right? So the one-step thinking is, people at the startup level making minimum wage aren't making much money, and they're having trouble making ends meet. Okay, then just raise the minimum wage.
Sure.
With no concern for costing jobs, which it's already proven that it does that. Now you're not just dealing with displacement, but you're dealing with automation, and you're dealing with you're dealing with efficiencies that companies find when they have to work around workers that they can no longer afford. I mean, this is not rocket science, but there's one-step thinking. Then just and then at $15, you think they're going to stop complaining about people at the low end of the scale?
What's her name? I don't know if it was Rashida Tlaib or that other one who was like
25 an hour.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's only Tim, how can you raise a family of 6 on one worker making only $15 an hour? It's outrageous.
All right,
it's disgusting.
You got me.
This is the United States of America.
You got me. Now, here's the thing. Can I interject? Or you have another thing? Okay.
I have several more from night one before we depart it.
Okay. Because this one actually spans both nights.
Okay. Well, but before we leave night one, let's get to it is something though that I think is a problem when we do have somebody who says he wants to be president of the United States in a largely Christian nation who has that kind of an understanding of Christianity. It's pretty disturbing and gross, really.
I think that if you look at, and it's so in stark contrast.
Said the atheist, by the way.
Yeah, said the atheist. If you look at his disposition, the way that he carries himself, generally with Pete Buttigieg, he's very rational and very ordered in the way that he thinks and lays out an argument, and I generally like it. But when he gets to this issue, he gets strictly emotional, which tells me that he's had bad personal experiences
being
in the past.
A gay guy from the
in the Midwest, and
probably
you know what?
Wasn't embraced culturally.
I'll say this, and I have no idea whether this is pertinent or not. But I met many self-professed Christians who are not people that I would want to hang out with at all. So being a Christian is not an inoculation against being ignorant, but. The point is that he gets so emotional about it, and then condemns tens of millions of people.
Yes,
and it's like a blind spot for him, Scott. It's like he can't help himself.
Or Tim, maybe just like on guns, he's lying. This is what Mayor Pete had to say when the issue turned to guns on the debate.
Okay.
What we're doing hasn't worked because we haven't had a system in Washington capable of delivering what the American people have told us they want. 90% of Republicans want universal background checks, not to mention the common sense solutions like red flag laws that disarm domestic abusers and flag mental health risks, and an end to assault weapons, things like what I carried overseas in uniform that have no business in American neighborhoods in peacetime, let alone anywhere near a school. I was at an event a few days ago.
All right. Now, just for 1 second here.
It's nice to know he was at an event a few days ago.
So, we're going to get into what happened at the event in a minute. But before we do, we're going to talk about the lie. So, he talks about how the 90% of people want all those things. And he talks about universal background checks and red flag laws and banning AR-15s. And he lumps them all together. Now, there may be in some poll where I think that it probably wasn't adequately explained, 90% support for quote-unquote universal background checks. But there definitely was not support of 90% for banning AR-15s because more than 10% of Americans, Tim, own AR-15s. It is the most popular gun in America. For people who don't know, it is a gun that's easily adaptable. So if you want to kind of shoot long range or short range, it has a lot of bolt-on sort of components that make it sort of a fun, accessorizable type of thing, and that's why guys like it. And also, it is the civilian model of the military firearm. The gun that he carried, so this is why he's a liar. He knows that he's carried an M4, which is a select fire gun. When you see somebody shooting, quote-unquote, a machine gun, that's what we're talking about that he took into battle. You can't get one of those in the United States unless you spend a fortune on, that's not an AR-15, that's a machine gun. In order to get a machine gun, you have to have multiple federal background checks, and the entry price is probably over $10,000. So for your average AR-15, though, you're talking about $1,000 or less probably, and you could just buy one of those like any other semi-automatic rifle. So in order to ban that, Tim, you're banning every semi-auto rifle in existence, and it'll be civil war.
Now, I'm not a gun guy like you, but I am a Second Amendment guy. But I take offense when I hear the AR-15 described by some gun grabbers as basically a weapon of war, a battlefield weapon. Would that ever be used in combat?
The AR-15, no, because they don't own any. The government doesn't own any AR-15s because they own
it's a consumer weapon.
They own the select fire model. Okay,
so it's like a prosumer kind of. If you look at it at the,
you could say that.
Okay,
it just doesn't have that automatic firing capability. That doesn't mean, by the way, that some country couldn't mount an army with those type of arms. They could, but they're still small arms. They're not quote unquote weapons of war with no peacetime value.
But people like Cory Booker make you think that they are.
Well, Tim, I happen to personally know people who responded to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas massacre. We had Officer Scott Mitchell of the Coral Springs Police Department as a guest on the Uprising who responded with, Tim, an AR-15 to that event. Okay, and that's what is an effective both deterrent for and use in self-defense. So they do have places in America and in schools, and our Second Amendment protects them. And if Buttigieg thinks he's going to take them away without some kind of massive change in terms of the Second Amendment and gun owners, I think he's again, he has to lie to make his point. But let's talk about that event that he went to, and here's what he said about that.
13-year-old asked me what we were going to do about school safety, and then began shaking, and then began crying. And we could talk about these policies, but we already know the policies. The only thing I could think of looking into the eyes of this child is we're supposed to be dealing with this so you don't have to. High school is hard enough without having to worry about whether you're going to get shot. When 90% of Americans want something to happen...
Whose fault is it that the school children of America don't understand that they're much more likely to get hit by lightning than they are to be involved in some kind of school shooting incident? Whose fault is that, Pete Buttigieg?
It's all about the headline, Scott. It's like Stalin once said about deaths, that 1 million deaths is a statistic and a single death is a tragedy.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. You get this one incident, and nobody's going to look at the statistics. They're not going to look at the frequency of occurrence of these kind of events. They're going to look at one and say, now every child in the country is at risk. And whose fault is that? Whose fault is that?
Well, I think that the biggest fault lies with the school administrators to the extent that they're terrorizing kids with these lockdown drills all the time, like it's some kind of rational response to the threat level. It's not. Where are the lightning drills? Where are the apply a tourniquet to a wildly bleeding person who got stuck in a combine drill? These are outlying events. They grab a lot of headlines,
right?
But they're outliers, and it is really terrorism in some sense to scare the crap out of these kids, like it's a real. Like the threat is so real that they really need to be prepared to defend against it rather than the outlier that it is. Well, Tim, before we do leave night one, we have two little betos to get by.
Oh, really? Is it worth our while?
We've got good news and bad news. Well, the one is really good news, Tim, and I'm going to set a clock now. We're at Friday, August 2, 2019. 10 years from today will be August 2, 2029, right?
Correct.
On that day, Tim, we can pop a cork of some champagne. We no longer will have to fight against these ridiculous climate change laws because it's going to be all over.
I've listened to scientists on this, and they're very clear. We don't have more than 10 years to get this right. And we won't meet that challenge with half steps or half measures or only half the country. We've got to bring...
So all we have to do, Tim, is fight this junk for another 10 years, and then they'll agree, okay.
Has there ever been a guy that's more trite, with more cliches, more hackneyed expressions, more typical absolute political speak? I mean, he every trite cliche he utters every time you see him. The guy is, you know what he is, Scott? He's what they call all hat and no cattle.
What was the Klobuchar one?
I'm coming from Texas. See, do you see what I did there?
What was the
Did
Klobuchar
you see?
one? All beer and no foam?
No.
Yeah, right. We're all Dan Rather.
all foam
We're all
and no
Dan
beer.
Rather in 2019, apparently. Here's what Beto's understanding of the United States is. This, Tim, I thought was so profoundly troubling because it's a lie. It's not true, and it says the worst about our country from a person who says that he wants to be president of it. This is Beto O'Rourke on how we got to be a great country, a wealthy country.
I want to acknowledge something that we're all touching on, which is the very foundation of this country. The wealth that we have built, the way we became the greatest country on the face of the planet, was literally on the backs of those who were kidnapped and brought here by force. The legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression is alive and well in every aspect of the economy and in the country today. As president, I will sign into law a new Voting Rights Act. I will focus on education, address healthcare disparities, but I will also sign into law Sheila Jackson Lee's reparations bill so that we can have the national conversation we have waited too long in this country to have.
Tim, finally, a conversation on race in America. We're really going to get ready to talk about it.
Scott. We're starving. We're starving for it. It's been in the closet for too long.
My whole life, I've been waiting for a conversation on race. Well, this has to be addressed, Tim, because it's a damnable lie. Slavery held back economic production in the United States. The Civil War was a massive drain. I mean, if we want to just talk about cold numbers, forget about the humanity involved, which is what he's making an argument about, the numbers, that we're rich. Maybe some individual slave owners got rich because of slavery, but the country and our gross output suffered mightily for keeping humans in bondage like that. It's only when humans are free and free to trade with each other that when the law recognized that, to the extent it does, is when the explosive growth happens. There are many countries in the world that have abundant natural resources or human resources, but what they don't have are free minds and free trade. That's what causes economic growth.
What passes for free trade these days, Scott, is laughable. I mean, they call these free trade agreements with thousands of pages of regulations.
How do I sell a widget over there? Well, go.
It's
exactly. Go hire 6 lawyers and 2 accountants, and they'll tell you how to do it.
It's considered free trade if it's better than the last agreement that you had. Then you call it free trade. But I mean, the kind of free trade you're talking about is unencumbered by national borders and regulations, and there's.
This guy wants to be president of the United States, and he thinks that we're born from.
What? This is this self-shaming, this self-renunciation, this pandering and groveling and talking about how you feel guilty because of all of your white privilege. How about saying, yeah, you know what? I did grow up with white privilege, but here's what I did with it. Mm-hmm. I accomplished this, and this, because to whom much is given, much is expected.
Tim,
that's the answer.
You provide the perfect bridge, Tim, to night 2. And this was the genius of Kirsten Gillibrand, who
my God.
You will not hear me say those two. That word in combination with her name often, but how she turns around being Lily White with the whole racial thing, Tim. See, the thing is, of course she benefits from this privilege, but who better, Tim, to take that message of privilege to the whites out there in America? Here's Kirsten Gillibrand.
Yes.
I think as a white woman of privilege who is a U.S. Senator running for President of the United States, it is also my responsibility to lift up those voices that aren't being listened to. And I can talk to those white women in the suburbs that voted for Trump and explain to them what white privilege actually is. That when their son is walking down a street with a bag of M&Ms in his pocket, wearing a hoodie, his whiteness is what protects him from not being shot. When their child has a car that breaks down and he knocks on someone's door for help and the door opens and the help is given, it's his whiteness that protects him from being shot. That is what white privilege in America is today. And so my responsibility is to not only lift up those stories, but explain to communities across America, like I did in Youngstown, Ohio, to a young mother, that this is all of our responsibilities, and that together we can make our communities stronger.
You know what? I mean, I tell you what. But does she really think that people want to vote for a vacuous white woman who hates being white and hates white people? Is that attractive to like black people?
Who else?
Scott?
Who better to go into white communities and let them know how racist they are than a white lady? That's a message
she's going to be the messenger.
Receive.
Yes,
this is what her value is in the marketplace. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm straight up. Now but look, here's the thing about Gillibrand. Okay. Finally, her kind of nonsense and her demagoguery and her emotional tirades that she goes into.
It sounds awful misogynist over there.
Yeah, I know. I'm waiting for the emails to come flooding in. But here's the thing.
Right.
So she did that in the first debate, trying to get attention. Didn't work. She tried it in this debate. It might have worked a little bit when she went after Joe Biden, for the fact that he had said like 35 years ago that women would be better off staying in the home. This is what happens when you have a 40-year career. And so he said, and I resent that. Kirsten Gillibrand says, as a professional woman, and I'm smart, and I'm thinking, gosh darn it, people like me.
Sure.
But now is a time where people like that are getting slapped down. So here's what Biden came back at her with.
I came up with the It's On Us proposal to see to it that women were treated more decently on college campuses. You came to Syracuse University with me and said it was wonderful. I'm passionate about the concern, making sure women are treated equally. I don't know what's happened except that you're now running for president.
So I understand.
I like it that he called her out on her BS. I mean, she's just throwing barbs in the air, hoping something will stick. She's like not even at 1%, Scott.
Oh no, it's ridiculous.
She's pathetic.
Well, anybody who's done what she's done,
pathetic.
If anybody needs a refresher, she thinks that anybody who makes a claim of rape should be believed, even if the direct evidence shows that they lied about that claim of rape.
Right,
which is what Emma Sulkowicz did, a.k.a. Mattress Girl, at NYU, and her lies about Paul Nungesser, who made him out to be a rapist in front of the world, when in fact she was an unhinged loony who wished for the quote-unquote perpetrator to have more relations with her, and he rejected her. And that, according to Ms. Gillibrand, is a rape.
Well, Scott, you're not down with the times, because we've now got a system of gender-based justice.
He's probably white too. Identifies as white, and
identifies as white, and the other gender. That's true.
As an
gender-based
ethnic,
justice,
something like that.
Well, if you're transgender, you got a shot.
Let's do the math. Let's get the calculator out. No, you're right.
So let me. Can I make one more point, sort of tying the two nights together, because this one has.
Well, by the way, night two. And we're going to get into Kamala Harris, Gabby going after Harris in a second. Night two was far more interesting in terms of the candidates differentiating themselves from each other. But go ahead. What is your bridge
so
comment here?
We had Messrs. Delaney and Hickenlooper and Ryan and also Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana, who was reasonably impressive. We had all of them making the points that, look, what
I'm not even joking, by the way. I totally forgot that guy was running for
president.
Right,
of course you did. The whole country did it. Even people in Montana did.
Oh, he's the guy who kept saying, we kicked the Koch brothers out of Montana,
right?
Yes,
right. He's the guy,
Yeah, by the way, that's real solid. Two American billionaires who employ,
it's good.
Dozens
good
of
for the
thousands
economy.
Of people.
Good for the economy of Montana.
Kicking them out.
But the point is that so these guys, we're trying to make the point. Hey, people, this is insane. When we're talking about giving free health care to illegal immigrants,
hey, can we just get a sanity check here? Yeah.
And
there's going to be 6 million people here tomorrow,
and confiscating private health insurance from 180 million Americans. I mean, we're headed for the cliff. You heard Hickenlooper. Saying we might as well FedEx the election. So he's saying his fear is that the party's gone too far left. But from the other side, if you dare to challenge what these outcasts, soon to be outcasts, are saying, then you're something much worse than a socialist or a communist or a Marxist. You're a Republican.
We are the Democrats. We are not about trying to take away health care from anyone. That's what the Republicans are trying to do. And we should stop using Republican talking points.
And Jake, your question is a Republican talking point. The healthcare industry will be advertising tonight with that talking point.
We cannot keep with the Republican talking points on this.
What you want to do instead is find the Republican talking point of a made-up piece of some other part.
So if you dare to question their Marxist, in many cases neo-Marxist policies, then you are just spouting a Republican talking point.
Like for Elizabeth Warren, for instance, Republican talking points are, if you had, let's say you made $75,000 a year and you took standard deductions on your tax form, and there was a certain amount of money that you had to pay to the government because of the laws under the tax code. Okay, and then let's say Elizabeth Warren came in, and with her health plan, you had to do the same thing, but you had to pay. There were more of those dollars that you had to pay to the government because of the tax plan. Republicans would call that a tax increase, okay? Elizabeth Warren, that's Republican talking points.
No, that's a Republican talking point.
If you have to give more money to the government because of the laws,
that's a Republican talking point.
If you want to call that a tax increase, that's a Republican talking point. Yeah. What we call that in Democrat world is netting out zero with health care.
But again,
and blah,
they can't.
Blah, blah. Good feeling.
What they're doing is trying to demonize them and delegitimize their argument by saying, as Republican, instead of taking on the argument at a substantive level and saying, look, here's why you're wrong. Well, they won't do that because they can't defend the policies that total like $200 trillion that were on that stage those two nights in Detroit.
The other thing that happened that was great, I thought, on the night two was that Tulsi Gabbard goes after Kamala Harris for her abominable behavior as Attorney General, and then of course pretending that it didn't happen. Like she's pretending to be a progressive prosecutor, like we have, for instance, in Philadelphia with D.A. Krasner, or even though she did a horrible job with the Fox prosecution or with the Smollett prosecution, Ms. Fox in Chicago is also a true progressive prosecutor. Now, like them or not, they talk it like they walk it. Unlike Kamala Harris, who is a cop prosecutor.
She can't have it both ways, and she's not going to be able to in the long run. But now,
not anymore.
She's not. Well,
let's listen to what Gabbard says.
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president. But I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. That would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
A damning indictment, and
she wants to win the black part of the primary, Kamala Harris.
And she's already got a lot of trouble in South Carolina, which is like the most African American primary. It's like 40% of the voters are black, and Biden has locked up a big advantage. South Carolina, last I looked, he still had that big advantage. Kamala Harris is not going over
She's
big time.
She's an anti-black Indian Canadian lady, and she ain't going to be president of the United States.
She's got to find a way to square up her progressive policies that she's promoting and her record as a prosecutor, because those two mix like oil and water.
She's proud of her record, and not about fancy speeches, Tim.
Right. That is my background. That is my work. I am proud of it. I think you can judge people by when they are under fire, and it's not about some fancy opinion on a stage, but when they're in the position to actually make a decision, what do they do? And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work.
twice, Tim, in the same debate. She talks about how it's not just about fancy speeches. By the way, those fancy speeches are the ones where we say we're going to go ahead and honor the constitutional rights of the accused and not just be on team prosecutor when it comes time for the death penalty.
And that was a particularly ineffective answer because she didn't answer the charge. She just said, it's easy for you to sit here and make the charge. I mean, that's like if somebody at Nuremberg had said, it's easy for you to say I shouldn't have gassed those people.
Okay.
You didn't have to do the deed, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, please. I mean, I don't know.
If she didn't throw the lever on those nonviolent marijuana prosecutions, Tim, who would have?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, and it shows that, you know, what she was trying to do was unmask Kamala Harris. Those two really hate each other. I don't know what there is personal, but
well, maybe
Gabbard,
one of them got her position by being the
but I don't want
sexual plaything of a powerful Democrat, and another one earned her position.
I want to walk that back a little bit, though, because what Tulsi Gabbard said was policy-based and record-based. It's based on what she actually did.
No,
you're right. So I didn't want to leave the impression.
Yeah.
But she's targeted Harris. She didn't target Biden. She targeted Harris more than anybody else.
Well, that's where she's going to make inroads, I think.
I think so.
It seems politically, unless she gets suicided by the Clintons or
like
something.
The tough woman vote.
Yeah.
In other words, because Kamala Harris, because she's a prosecutor.
Right.
Tulsi, because she was in combat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sure. I guess that makes eminent sense. Look, the thing that's going to be so interesting, Scott, is to see now, because this is what I call a potential Democrat moderate moment. Let's see what these no-names like Delaney and Ryan and Hickenlooper and Bullock, let's see if they rise at all in the polls. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because if they don't rise after that performance.
What is your prediction, Tim? When is the next? First of all, how far from this do we look to actually see? Is it a 1 week out where we see the real impact of this, if any, or even less than that? Or
I'd
more
say
than that?
10 days.
10 days out. And
more than 1 week, less
You're
than
more
two.
of an astute observer of the actual retail politics than I am. Give me your best guess. Where are we at here? Do those moderates see a bump or not?
I think it'll be a mild bump.
Well,
because the party, the activist base, which I presume are the people who are most likely to be considered registered voters.
Likely voters, I think, is probably
I don't
the
think
term,
they
right?
do likely voters this far out.
Oh, really?
They do likely voters, I think, only from like 3 months in or 6 months up to the election, because they can't as if the person could die between now and 16 months from now. But I think that...
I thought it was a metric of your past voting performance in a primary. That's where the likely came in. Meaning if you poll me and you say, Scott, who are you going to vote for in the primary? And I tell you, and you say, have you ever voted in a primary before? And I say, no. Well, I'm not necessarily going to be a likely voter. But if I say every single one I've been eligible in since I turned 18, now I'm a likely voter.
I think it's a matter of the polling firms not being willing to stand behind likely voter data this early. But I don't know how much it means, but I will say this with registered voters. I mean, Biden entered the race in April, right? In April, May, June,
Tim,
July.
I depend on you for that sort of data point. Is the Joe Biden for president reporter on the Uprising.
Correspondent.
There you go.
Far more
contributing editor.
Glorious title. Right. Contributing editor. I like that one.
For sure. You get the full, I'm not going to treat you like they did Geraldo Rivera. You get to say the Uprising when you do your report.
Well, you get regular contributor on the radio show, so I think I should deserve. Now I've completely lost whatever brilliant point I was prepared to make.
I think that for me, the thing about Kamala Harris that I cannot abide is if you want to be that pro-prosecutor type person and run on that, and that's what the country wants, as much as I may disagree with that, that's one thing. But to do the deed, to lock up the people for the nonviolent marijuana charges when it suits you, and then you get to run from the right without a challenger in a San Francisco election, and then when you want to run for president, you pretend that that's not that you were this social justice. That's the thing I just can't abide, and I want to expose to the world. She is a cop or a hypocrite. Take your pick. Either one disqualifies her.
If the base of the Democratic Party, if the activist base, if the primary voters in the Democratic Party are as far left as it appears that they are by the fact that 23 out of the 24, let's say 16, 17 of the candidates are trying to appeal to the far left, then Kamala Harris will ultimately be in trouble because you can't, I would say that the progressive credentials and commitment to the progressive cause on the part of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are unimpeachable. Nobody can question that they've been hard leftists from the beginning. As far as Kamala Harris...
Those millionaires, Tim, have for their whole lives advocated for
but there's been a consistency to their rhetoric, as opposed to Kamala Harris, who, again, how do you reconcile being an attorney general and a prosecutor and a city attorney and putting an awful lot of minority people in jail, and then go over to the other side and say you're in favor of the Green New Deal and you're in favor of Medicare for all and all of these things? If I was a leftist, if I was a progressive, I would question how committed she really is to that.
Well, I think that we're going to see more of that. I want to ask you as a closeout question. You are the Biden correspondent, Tim. He came into the debate as still maintaining a strong favorite position. What did he do? Did he bolster his position? Is it an even keel? Is he going to tick down a few points? Where does the Biden
I think it was
stand?
Absolute flat line. He didn't go up and he didn't go down. He didn't embarrass himself. He stumbled a few times. He said Republican instead of Republican,
right,
and stumbled a few times. Big deal. But he didn't embarrass himself. And he didn't distinguish himself. He was better than in the first debate. I'll say that. I think he did enough to hold. I mean, the guy's got a 15 to 20 point lead.
Right.
He did enough to hold it, and nobody that I saw really. I don't know. Bernie had a better debate the second time, I thought, and Elizabeth Warren has been pretty steady through the two debates. So I don't think Kamala is looking too hot right now, to be honest with you. I'd put her fourth in the running at this point behind Biden, Sanders, and Pocahontas.
Stay tuned to LibertyNation.com 24/7, 365, where you can see follow-ups to this discussion in print. I'm sure that you'll be writing about the impact of this before we next record. So
I always say it's a guilty pleasure, Scott.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
See ya.